It's funny, at least to me, to watch the religious desperately try to deny that their religious beliefs, have been debunked. Anything that can be, has been. The stuff that's left over is empty claims based on faith, carefully hidden from rational evaluation by people who just don't care if any of it is actually true. So, sure, let's go do some more of that. This time out, we have a suggested video by Jon B called Has Science Disproved Christianity? On a channel called Questioning Christianity. And I'll be honest, if this is how he questions his beliefs, I have no idea what embracing them would look like, because this is about the same damn thing. This is, as with most religious videos, a theist assuming that everything that he already believes is true, no evidence required, complete with cherry-picking data points, ignoring actual history, and pretending that they can't possibly be wrong, no matter how wrong they are. In other words, it's just another day around here. So let's get started on the first half of this video, just to see what's what, because I'm pretty sure the religious aren't going to get anywhere rational fast.
Do you have to choose between God and science? Well, one of the most common reasons cited for rejecting Christianity is the belief that God and science are locked in a perpetual war as two competing explanations for the universe.
Here's the problem, though. You can't just say, well, I have an explanation for the universe. You actually have to prove it. I could not legitimately claim that the universe can be best explained by invisible, intangible universe-creating pixies. Not if I wanted to be taken seriously at all. I mean, I could say it, but in so doing, I gain the burden of proof to show that my explanation is reasonable, rational, and most importantly, true. I have to learn how to support it by objective evidence. Just because I believe it, that doesn't mean that it actually happened as I described. Just because I can profess faith, that doesn't prove that it's real. And this is where every single theist that I have ever seen in my life fails miserably. They don't attempt to show that it's reasonable, rational, and certainly not that it's true, because that requires evidence, and sadly for them, they've got none.
With faith and religion in God's corner, well, fact and reason are on team science.
And there you go. Faith and religion don't mean anything. If it isn't good enough for the Hindu's faith to prove that Krishna is real, then your faith isn't good enough to prove that God exists. There are no double standards here, and that's what the religious absolutely depend on. This is why you can never allow the religious to run around with the goalposts. Pick a standard and stick to it. You don't get special dispensation just because it makes you happy. That's just dumb.
And with high-profile scientists moonlighting as vocal critics of religion, you could easily form the impression that modern science has progressively chased away the superstitious shadows of religious belief.
For the most part, yes. At least for anyone who follows the same methodology that makes science so demonstrably useful. The problem here is that most theists aren't at all concerned with whether or not their beliefs are factually correct. They just want to believe. If it doesn't matter to the Christian that the Hindu has faith, or that the Muslim has faith, or that the Scientologist has faith, then it doesn't matter if they have faith either. That's something they just don't want to hear.
After all, didn't the ancients used to invoke the gods to explain all manner of natural phenomena that they just didn't understand? Lightning, well, that was Zeus from Mount Olympus. And thunder, that was Thor, Chris Hemsworth, striking his hammer. And yet, the rise of modern science has meant that these gaps in our knowledge of the natural world, the ones religious people used to plug God into, are quickly disappearing, such that soon there will be no room left for God at all.
You know when I say that a theist is so close to comprehending, but they just can't take that last step? Yeah, that's this guy. He can't tell the difference between his blind faith and the blind faith of others. He's got to be special while everybody else is wrong. Except he's not special. He's just as delusional as all the rest. Science has shown that religion is unnecessary except to the people who just want to believe. The only reason that nobody cares that Thor is a myth is because hardly anybody out there believes that Thor is real anymore. There are a few, but I'm not sure how seriously I take a lot of those people. If this had happened in the midst of the Roman era, then you can be sure that they'd be out there killing off the heretics, just like the Christians and the Muslims have done throughout their history. Christians like to pretend that Tacitus wrote about a real Jesus. But he also wrote about the religion of the Suebi in his first century work, Germania, who worshipped Thor and Mercury, Hercules and Mars, etc. Hercules, in the Suebi religion, was just another version of Thor. Christians would view this as mythology, while of course their own views represent history. But then again, so too would the Germanic people who believed in a Thor analog. That's what they'd say about Christians.
And so, Neil deGrasse Tyson summarizes the belief of skeptical scientists, that God is an ever-receding pocket of scientific ignorance.
And he's right. There has never, ever been a single question in the history of humanity that has positively, demonstrably been shown to be answered by a God. Any God. Every single time that somebody claims God done it, science shows eventually that was not the case. Yet the religious really like the idea of their gods, and while they're happy to say that other gods aren't real, they just can't quite get there about their own. Their God is special. Why? Because they say so. And I'm sorry, but that just doesn't make it so.
So what does the Christian story have to do with the study of nature? Has science disproved Christianity?
In every way that's currently possible, yes. The religious don't like that, of course, but so what? This is about truth and not about your feelings. How you feel about things are entirely irrelevant. Nobody ought to care. That anybody does, that shows the inherent weakness of their capacity to reason and be rational, and that's not something that anybody ought to be proud of.
Well, the simple truth is the conflict hypothesis that God and science are at war is a myth, one long abandoned by historians of science, even though it gets propagated today by well-meaning but misinformed secular thinkers.
No, that's not the case. Of course, who really cares about historians of science anyhow? That's like saying, according to New Testament scholars. But I don't care about New Testament scholars. I care about the evidence, and they're sadly lacking in any of that. Now, to some degree, I will acknowledge that he's correct, because there has never been a war between science and Christianity, any more than there's been a war between science and Bigfoot or science and flat earthers. One side is just wrong, and it's not science, at least not so far as we have any evidence for. Of course, the religious are really good at proclaiming that everybody's out to get them. There's the annual war on Christmas, for instance, even though that's laughably untrue. Christians lost that battle decades ago. This is just one more thing that they need to give up on, although it's highly doubtful that they will.
This conflict myth traces back to two 19th century figures, John William Draper and Andrew Dickson White, who intentionally recast the relationship between religion and science in a negative light, and crafted a conflict narrative to suit their own agenda.
Which means absolutely nothing. Now, I hope that somewhere in here he tries to justify any of this, even though I think we know that he can't, and if you ever talk to any actual scientists today, you wouldn't get a lot of those who would agree that there was ever a battle between science and God. Science just doesn't work that way. It's too busy looking for evidence and trying to figure out the best explanations for things beyond their own fifis. That's the purview of religion, after all. The reality is that the religious are the ones with the childish persecution complex. everybody's out to get us. No, you're just wrong. Telling you that you're wrong when you're wrong, that's not persecution, that's reality. Maybe you people need to get a grip.
As it turns out, the truth is far more interesting. For starters, let's begin with a simple observation, since that is a huge part of the scientific method. If God and science were at war, then you would expect to find a certain demographic of casualties strewn out across the intellectual battlefields, namely scientists who believe in God.
There aren't a lot of those if you notice. The ones that do exist, they tend to fall into the soft sciences. The hard scientists, the ones who deal with physical sciences, etc., they don't tend to buy into this religious nonsense at all, by and large. Remember, 93% of the National Academy of Sciences are atheists. This has been going on for a very, very, very long time, so it shouldn't be a surprise. Back in 2009, Pew Research polled members of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and they found that, at the time, 40% of respondents rejected belief in any gods. And remember, this is the time when Pew Research also found that 95% of Americans believed in some form of deity or higher power. The more science learns, the less scientists believe. It's always been that way and it always will, which is why religion has always sought out scientists for punishment or death. You can't compete with reality, no matter how hard you try.
For if God had been buried by science, then any scientist worth their salt would surely give up on their religious beliefs, right? The only problem is, it doesn't seem to be happening.
Except it does. Those numbers are increasing. This is why the religious are so interested in explaining why there are so many atheists rather than just admitting that they're losing. You are not going to find any of the Christian denominations that have been hemorrhaging members for decades being honest about it. They're all looking for scapegoats. It's not our fault that everybody thinks we're crazy. No, it's got to be something else. This is why videos like this are so ludicrous. They're trying to explain their way around the truth. They just can't accept the truth as what it is. You know, the truth.
A great many high-profile scientists are also believers in God. Francis Collins, who directed the Human Genome Project and headed up the National Institute for Health in the USA.
Sure, but his reason for becoming a Christian was because he found a waterfall frozen in 3 parts in the woods. That is not a rational, evidence-based reason to adopt any position whatsoever. He might be a brilliant scientist, and when it comes to his work in genetics, he absolutely is. But when it comes to his religious beliefs, he is entirely out of his mind. This is what we call compartmentalization. You wall off all the crazy parts over here when you're doing science, and when you're out there believing the religious wingnuttery, the science aspects are not permitted to intrude. And that's not something to be proud of either.
Jennifer Wiseman, who serves as the senior project scientist for NASA's Hubble Space Telescope.
And if you look at her talking about faith, science and religion never, ever, ever cross paths. In fact, she jumps to something entirely different as soon as her religious beliefs come up. She said, "We will likely never visit other planets, but through science, we can have the ability to understand our universe. It's a sign of God's love, and in turn, we'll turn that back into praise for our God." The second part has absolutely nothing to do with the first. It's complete dissociation from the reality of her scientific work to, God done it. Because that's what makes her happy. These are not people about whom you should be impressed.
And Gerhard Ertl, a Nobel Prize-winning chemist. And in case you're just worried that I'm cherry-picking these few, a survey of Nobel Prize winners across the 20th century reveals that more than 85% self-identified as either Christian or religiously Jewish, outing themselves as believers in God.
Sure, but if you start looking at more recent Nobel Prize winners in scientific fields, it's mostly atheists. Physics, for example. Virtually every winner from 2016 onward has been an atheist. The majority of the ones from 1999 onward have been atheists too. The more that we learn, the less these people need to rely on faith to get them through the day. Also, you notice that this guy is claiming Judaism on his side. Well, plenty of Nobel Prize winners who have been identified as Jewish were in fact ethnically Jewish or culturally Jewish, but they were open atheists. And that includes people like Richard Feynman, Niels Bohr, Rita Levi-Montalcini, among many others. How much do you want to bet that this guy just isn't admitting their actual positions?
So from this simple observation, we can draw a simple conclusion. That if science had disproved God, then someone forgot to tell an awfully large number of prize-winning scientists.
Modern scientists don't need to be told because, by and large, they don't believe in any gods. It's one reason that the religious always try to go back in time as far as they can. That way, they can live in an age where almost everybody took their ridiculous beliefs seriously. And this is not that time. It's time they stop pretending that it is. Religion is dying in the Western world. Good riddance to it.
And looking back even further in history, the scientific revolution, it didn't take place in a vacuum. Rather, it seems that the Christian story set the stage for the rise of modern science.
Not really. Now, sure, you have more people who believed in gods doing scientific work. That kind of thing is undeniable. But welcome back to compartmentalization. You had people who, through their culture and their upbringing, they were forced into religious adherence, but they also had to look at the real world, and then they realized that there was some pretty neat stuff out there going on. Now, in passing, based on their cultural predispositions, they may have concluded that God was ultimately responsible, but you notice that not one of them, not one theist in history, has ever actually demonstrated that to be the case. It's just faith, and faith doesn't get you anywhere, especially in science. Just because you really want it to be true, that doesn't mean that it is.
In pondering why science exploded in a Christianized Europe, as opposed to in Africa or Asia centuries before, historians of science have landed on a consensus that the Christian story provided the intellectual soil and motivational fertilizer out of which the scientific method could ultimately grow.
Not remotely true. Oh, I'm sure you really want that to be the case, but it's just not. The Muslims could say the same thing about the revolution in the Middle East that saw the beginning of modern mathematics. Modern chemistry got its start with the ancient Greeks long before Christianity was even a gleam in anyone's eye. There were scientific revolutions going on in the Far East, and it's funny how the only ones any of them want to talk about are in Europe, because that's the only place that actually fits their narrative. There were lots of things going on in Europe at the time, things that had absolutely nothing at all to do with religion, and that made it a lot more likely for scientific breakthroughs to occur. This guy is a real imbecile.
You see, the Christian story teaches that 1. Our universe is rationally ordered by an eternal mind. So the forces of nature are static, they follow laws, rather than being changing with the ever-fickle whims of capricious deities.
And this is where they tend to get into trouble, one of many places. If you really think about it, they're just shooting themselves in the foot. If their God is unchanging, if there are supposed objective truths out there, then reality couldn't exist at all. Hell, the Bible couldn't exist as it does because the Bible records several instances of God demonstrably changing his mind. How does that work exactly? How does a deity that knows absolutely everything that could ever happen, how does that deity ever regret anything? Genesis 6:6, and the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. How exactly does that work?
That 2. Humanity is made in God's image, with rational minds of our own that have the capacity to unlock the secrets that God has woven into the fabric of creation.
Well, that's your story. Unfortunately, just because you have a story, that doesn't mean that your story is true. We can find stories in other religions claiming the same kind of thing, that Allah made Adam in his image. Granted, they seem to think that Adam was a giant 60 cubits tall, which translates into about 90 feet, and I bet Christians aren't going to take that one seriously, are they? Nor should they. These people are just emotionally attached to their silly tales in their silly books. I don't care about your beliefs. I care about your facts. Come on back when you've got some.
The 3, God gave humanity in Genesis the cultural mandate to study creation in order to harness its potential.
Well, guess what? Other religions do the exact same thing. Big deal. Go read the Upanishads sometime. There are a lot of very, very clear parallels between Hinduism and Christianity, and Hinduism has been around a whole lot longer. In fact, it's hard not to find all kinds of older mythologies that were adopted into Christianity and Judaism. The story of Noah getting drunk and his son getting disowned, that's not original to the Jews. You can find elements of Greek Gnosticism, Zoroastrian dualism, elements of Hinduism and Buddhism, etc., etc., etc. The more you know, the less likely any of them seem to be. They've all just copied from each other. It only takes a little dispassionate investigation and study to figure that one out.
And that 4, humanity were damaged by evil, meaning as fallen creatures, we can either fudge our results or misinterpret the data, and so we require a system of external and repeatable measurement and peer review that could guard against our darker demons and promote the search for truth.
Just like every other religion out there. Again, you've got a multitude of examples here. Ancient Judaism had a different view of sin than modern Christians do. There, you had 3 levels of transgressing against God. Muslims had a different view. In Islam, sin is an act, it's not a state of being. Humans are not born sinful. Humans may be predisposed towards sin, but they are not born being irrevocably evil. Sin exists in Hinduism, Buddhism, even Baha'i, and they're trying to promote humans as naturally good, but still, with their beliefs, sin exists. It's pretty hard to find any religion out there without some kind of sin concept. But I'm sure he doesn't know that, nor does he probably care.
Which is why when you survey the fathers of modern scientific fields, Newton and Kepler, Faraday and Pascal, they were all of them believers in God, Jesus, and the Christian story.
Notice he's at least 150 years out of date on all of those, right? That's why they do it. They can't talk about modern science because modern science doesn't take their religion seriously, and they can't have that. It's why they embrace the past and they are absolutely terrified of the present, because the present doesn't get them where they desperately want to go.
Far from seeing their Christian faith as a hindrance to their endeavors, they genuinely believe that God inspired their science.
And that doesn't matter. What they believed, what you believe, none of that means a damn thing. Either a thing is true or it's not. Your feelings don't have anything at all to do with it. This is one thing that the religious, and it's not just Christians, it seems to be all of them, it's something that they just can't handle. Well, here's some stuff that happened a long, long time ago, back when we had some control over the world, and therefore listen to that stuff and ignore the other stuff that makes us look bad. It's positively childish. It really is.
Johann Kepler remarked in his study of mechanics that he was thinking God's thoughts after him. Isaac Newton argued in his Principia Mathematica that this was intended to move people from perceiving the rational order in the universe to then believing in an intelligent creator.
Yes, it's intended to sway people away from being rational, reasonable people into being religious zombies. That's not something to be proud of. He then goes on to quote C.S. Lewis, and I think you all know how little respect I have for him, so let's just pause here for the day and wrap it up next time, lest it get too ridiculously long. Now, you notice that he hasn't gotten into any actual science yet, right? Nor has he addressed anything that his religion says that science can evaluate. This isn't a question about science disproving Christianity. I don't think he really understands the mechanisms by which that could happen. nor the requirements on his side of the aisle that he and his ilk need to address in order to show themselves in line with any kind of rational scientific inquiry. Why? Because they don't give a crap. They just want to believe. And he's just another example of why religion and the religious are such a ludicrous joke. Anyway, thanks once again to Jon B. We'll be back in a couple of days with the last half, and if you have anything to say on this so far, by all means, let me know down in the comments. Until then, stay sane.